I was watching a video last week, I think maybe, about the evolution of VR in terms of the immersion, and it was comparing it to when you played on a PlayStation One. You thought at the time you was playing on the pinnacle that there's ever going to be. There's never going to be anything better than this. But
Yeah.
I could even look at a PS1 screen now of a game and think, I remember that feeling back in the day of thinking, this is amazing. These graphics. But then PlayStation 2 came out, and you're like, I remember, I think it was GTA San Andreas when that came out. I was like, oh my
Hmm.
God, like, I can't see graphics getting any better than this. And like, look at us
Yeah.
now. We can literally play like a near enough close to real game. And then you look back on San Andreas and think, how did I have that feeling of this is the pinnacle of
Well, even
graphics?
now, in 20 years from now, you're going to look at like Cyberpunk 2077 and go, wow, that looks terrible. But the biggest change that VR is bringing is it's changing everything we've always done in 2D to actual 3 dimensions. And that is still one of the biggest things about VR that is like the unsung benefit that I think will change things. Because right now, like someone said, there's been no innovation in video games since Mario 64. And I think about that, I'm like, that's crazy. And then you think about it, you're like, it's gotten better looking, and the jump mechanics have gotten better, and the games have gotten better. But ultimately, a game now versus those games then, it's still that 2 dimensional perspective of a 3 dimensional world that you're able to travel around and do all these things in. It still is just a better looking version of that.
Mm.
Going inside of the game and seeing things in 3 dimension, real true to life in VR is like the next big change, like from when games went from a flat side scroller to being 3D inside of the game. This is like a real next step that really can take us somewhere. But with technology, this new tech comes, so we have to take a step back. We can't make graphics as good with VR because it's rendering twice as much through 2 eyes. The stereoscopic 3 dimensional vision is getting better with each gen of this tech. But even the first ones, like you saw on the phone, it made you sick. It was one flat screen. As we get better and better at actually conveying the real 3 dimensionality of VR, it's going to get to a point where you just feel like you're in a different world rather than seeing a different world through a TV, which is what we've been used to with gaming consoles.
Mm. Yeah, that's very true. That with the Nintendo, um, you're still externally playing a game, whereas
Yeah.
being immersed, it is the next step up.
But we sort of, do you know when we did the console wars video? We sort of when it the jump from PS4 to PS5, it doesn't feel like much has changed from then. Like
Yeah.
pretty much, like they're still releasing like God of War Ragnarok, for example, has been released on PS4 and PS5. The graphics might be slightly better, but not that much to affect your actual experience playing the game. And I feel like there is a need in gaming now to sort of jump up to that next level and really change things, which VR does seem like the logical step in that direction.
Yeah, it's totally different. One problem that we're having in VR though is these traditional game developers, just like we said earlier in the conversation, the internet companies trying to do the metaverse. These traditional gaming companies are coming into VR and trying to like translate their games to VR. And a lot of times it's not working. You look at like Medal of Honor, that's a huge gaming franchise and people love it. They tried to make a VR game and it kind of fell on its face because people who start in VR, they start developing in VR, they know how important every mechanic is in VR. When I reload, I don't want to press a button and everything happens. I want to grab my mag, pull it out, put a new mag in, cock it, and then go back to shooting. I want to feel like I'm doing it. But a lot of these companies step in and they think, okay, we're just going to take our traditional game, put it in VR, and they're not utilizing it to its true potential. And so what we're seeing in VR is a lot of like the best VR games are coming from companies that started in VR, that completely developed in VR, and they're pushing the envelope.
So, do you think some of these VR companies are going to take over the big game developers?
I think at least in the VR space, yes. Like even now, like you look at like Resolution Games and others that are these known gaming, and the gaming world would be like, who are they? That's not EA, who are they? But they are the ones that will eventually probably be the conglomerate huge companies in VR that we all know the name of instantly if we like VR because they started the work and built it up. They didn't just come in thinking, I already know how games work, and now I'm going to come take over the VR scene. It's totally different. And these big companies aren't all realizing that. Some of them came in experimental. Half-Life Alyx, I'm thinking of, Valve, they came in experimental, and that wasn't even supposed to be a game. That was just them playing around with Half-Life assets, trying to figure out how VR can work. And at some point they said, this is too good. This has to actually become a game. But that was them experimenting. That's what's needed. You have to experiment. You have to learn because it's a different tech. Other companies, a lot of them step in and we all go, wow, what the heck happened? Because like it's nothing compared to what's out there and it just sucks. You need people that see that VR is different and don't just try and replicate the same formula.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because I know Epic Games are trying to do a lot in the VR space. What are they just doing what you first mentioned? They're just porting games into VR.
So Epic Games, I know that I'm interested to hear more because you're saying like it seems like they're trying to. From my perspective, as someone who's in VR, I feel like their games launcher, they're like giving out free games that are VR games, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that Epic Games has like tried to develop themselves for VR, anything like that. So that might be a.
Oh, I might be off the
interesting.
mark with it then, because you probably know if I mentioned it.
But I know that like they just on the Epic Store gave out Star Wars Squadrons for free. And so like
well, they must be
they have good things on their store that you can then play in VR, but none of it is anything that they've developed. And I know that there was recently just something that came out that said like there's not going to be anything to do with like Fortnite in VR as far as we know and stuff. So like I don't know, but I can't think of hardly any mainstream developers that are now known in the VR space for making good VR games. Even a lot of the ones that were like made on Sony were made by like Sony's Japan studios or like Impulse Gear, these other smaller studios that aren't huge in the gaming space, but they're passionate about VR. And that's why their games succeed, because they make better games. Not every game in VR is good, but the ones that are good, you can tell they had a passion when they did.